welcome to our first. This is a bit of a somewhere between a beta and a 1.0, leveraging thought leadership live on LinkedIn. So Bill Sherman's here with me as my guest today, and this is something new that we're going to be doing. So as most of you know, we've had a podcast that we've been doing for 3.5+ years, 350 episodes. And what we decided to do is sort of change it up a little bit. We're keeping the podcast, not doing anything different with that. But what we will do here is every 2 weeks have a new series. And the difference in this series is we're going to have two thought leaders that are fantastic and one mediocre host, which will be me. And some of the themes that we have coming up starting next week, we'll have guests next Wednesday. I've got Shannon Huffman-Polson and Jen Rutherford. So two folks with some amazing military experiences. The week after that, we've got two folks from the publishing world. Then we've got two rock star speakers. Then we've got another week with some rock star speakers, some amazing consultants, and on and on and on. So it's going to be two interesting guests, one mediocre host, and hopefully 20-30 minutes of cool conversation. So welcome, Bill. Let's try to have an interesting conversation while we're waiting.
Hey, Peter, how you doing?
Good. So October 1st is officially not a national holiday, but for most of us, we know it's the start of Q4. So,
and the countdown to 2022. So are many people in the height of budget season right now.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I think number one is just where things are now, Q4 versus where they were Q1. So Q1, everyone's optimistic. The vaccines are coming out, but nobody knows what's going on. Maybe, the buzz then was Q4. We're going to have so many events and whatever. What are you seeing and hearing now that Q4 is actually here for how this quarter and probably more importantly next year is going to look?
So I think as you look at the organizational side, especially the organizational thought leadership side, there's still questions in terms of, are we doing in-person events? Are we doing hybrid events? Is it remote? The things that you would have done for going to conferences, trade shows, speaking events, those are all still up in the air, right? And we don't know what that is. But organizations have actually had to put pencil to paper, marker to whiteboard and say, okay, we can't put a pause on putting thought leadership out there, and we can't solely rely on a white paper to do that work. So how do we sustain conversations in a personal way that, when we may not be traveling and meeting person to person? So I think the vibe is budgets are being reallocated, and you have to be thoughtful on where are you putting your time and effort and who are you focusing on.
Yeah, and I think part of the vibe is also you have to have a plan B, C, and D, and we're living in a world where everything's in pencil. Like, hey,
Yep.
see you in Vegas in January or not, right?
Well, and it's a good example for, I know several people who have been planning to go to major events and conferences. They're just looking week to week and saying, is that still on? Do I need to book that flight? Am I taking a train? Those questions are real, not only on the presenter side, but on the participant side as well.
Yep. And then, if we talk about looking forward from an individual thought leader's perspective, I think by now most have sort of figured out what their lane is. Some have dropped out, right? Like anything else, anytime there's a big shakeout in the marketplace, others have gone elsewhere. But I think by now we've been doing the COVID thing, if you will, for long enough, where people have done some really amazing, interesting, creative things. We are seeing a plethora of new books come out, like the quality and quantity, unlike anything we've seen before. Because one thing that COVID did was give a bunch of smart people a bunch of time back. And, they typically didn't fill it up, binging on Netflix, or if they did, they also wrote some great books. So there's some great stuff coming out. And
fall is typically the season for business book releases. Very few people will grab a business book and take it to the beach. You and I may be exceptions to that, right? But for most folks, from September through November is a huge launch for business books. And I think you're right. A lot of people, both in the individual side of thought leadership, as well as the corporate and the academic side, had more time to sit down and say, okay, if I'm not going to be on planes, if I'm not traveling, let me codify some of the ideas that have been going through my head, or let me respond to the events of the day.
And I think they fall into a couple of categories. There are things that are clearly topical, working remotely, mental health, DE&I, culture, the great resignation, the things that are clearly sort of headlines in the long form in a book. And then there are other things that are more evergreen, more traditional thought leadership that's always needed, but there's more high quality stuff out there because there was more bandwidth by which people could use to produce it. So I think we're living in sort of a post-COVID thought leadership renaissance era.
Well, and I would add even a third category. You've had people who either on behalf of their organization have had to peer into the future and say, okay, what's the world going to look like and how do we chart a course there? As well as people who have asked that same question and said, let's chart the course in a new way coming out of this. And I think that ability to spend time and to think about these issues and say, what are we doing going ahead? What will the world be like? And how do we position ourselves? That ability, and I hate to say pause,
Yeah.
but reset gives us a chance to think about some of the assumptions that we've blithely followed for years, if not decades, in
Yep.
business.
And I think one of the advantages that a lot of thought leaders have that they may not be taking advantage of is when you're talking to executives at a senior organization, their world tends to be, and I don't mean this in the wrong way, a little bit myopic. Like, who else are they spending their days with? If I work
Mhm.
at Citibank, I spend my days with other people that work at Citibank or in finance or in New York or whatever the case may be. You have this perspective as a thought leader, and there's a lot of benefit in sort of being a bit of a hummingbird and saying to them without violating any confidentialities or NDAs or something. It seems to me as if, like I saw this morning, PwC announced that I think 40,000 of its 53,000 employees never have to go back to a thing called an office if they don't want to.
Mhm.
That's a big deal, right? So I think as thought leaders, it's people want to know, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? Oh, well, we're seeing some people that have tried this and that doesn't seem to be working really well. Some people have tried that. It's yet to be determined. Here's some interesting and creative things. So even if it's outside of your specific domain area, just the fact that you're an observer and you talk to lots and lots of people in lots of different industries, that's valuable to share with clients and prospects.
So one of the things that I've been watching over the last year, year and a half, which I think is interesting, is how the velocity of thought leadership ideas has changed pre-COVID to wherever we are now. And I think because we are now in an age where we are more comfortable, maybe some Zoom fatigue, but we're more comfortable talking to each other. And in fact, you and I are across the country, Las Vegas and New York. We're some days, it's as easy to talk to your neighbor or to go into the city. So this ability for conversations to happen without stepping on planes, without having to be in person, but to have that depth of conversation, I'm seeing the velocity of ideas accelerating globally.
Yeah, and I think that globally piece, more people are more global now than ever before, and I don't see
Absolutely.
that going away. And it's like, if you look at, and I don't think we're all that special or different, your calendar or mine, it's Europe, it's here, it's Far East,
Mhm.
whatever. In a single day, I mean, we're zooming across time zones in ways that you
We're
never could
following the
have.
sun. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which is really cool. And I think it also, there's a market arbitrage play there where you can bring yourself to anywhere. Before, there was a bias to say, if we were talking to a client in Paris, like, oh, well, they're in the States, it might be difficult time zone or really expensive if we fly them in. The work is the work is the work, right? And I think it's just really interesting how comfortable people have gotten. I also think I want to add sort of a different thought. It's also interesting to see sort of the dust settling and some new corporate norms forming. So I have seen, from my vantage point, different sort of cultures or signals popping up inside of organizations. So some organizations have a no camera policy, right? Oh, you don't need to be on camera when we're
Mhm.
doing a meeting. In most, it's assumed, and I don't know if it's literally stated. You will be on a Zoom, you will be on camera, but I think that's really, really interesting. In my opinion, and I've seen things on both sides of the aisle here, is, if it's a Zoom and everybody's on camera and you're not, you know, you should get in front of that and say, listen, sorry, I'm not on camera. I'm in the car. or I just couldn't be today, or I just came back from the gym or whatever, because it's just weird. Are you Because then people are thinking, is he there? Is he really there? Is he doing email? Is he like whatever? It's just all these new technologies lead to new norms and new questions.
Well, and if you think back to the age of, the teleconference, right? When we were all muted during a teleconference, we weren't as concerned with what is everyone doing on the phone. But now, when there's the possibility of the camera, that sort of anxiety of engagement increases. Are people engaged? Are they paying attention? Did I lose my audience? Those are big questions.
Yeah, and I think the way you eliminate some of those questions is by being on as often as you can, right? Because to
Mhm.
me, if you're using a tool like Zoom, you're using it to take advantage of audio and video. If it doesn't need to be a video, let's just do it on the phone, or say, what, let's get on that Zoom link, but we just need to talk, so keep the cameras off. It's a 5-minute quick catch up kind of thing. But I think having the language around that, setting the expectation, all those sort of things are really, really interesting.
So, from different parts of thought leadership have different calendars and paces, right?
Right.
So, the speaking calendar for if you're a keynote speaker out in the world, we typically in a non COVID year be going into busy conference and keynote speech season,
Oh, we'd be
right?
knee deep in it post Labor Day. Yeah, from
Exactly.
now,
Exactly.
till Thanksgiving, we'd be, 7, 8 gigs a month, 12 gigs a month for a lot of folks.
And a lot of those folks would be coming here to my town of Las Vegas, and they'd
Mhm.
be staying at one of the properties here. But the question is, in terms of cadence, what do you see over the next, 45 days, right? So not the full end of year, but between now and say mid-November. What should the individual thought leader be focusing on and working on in this last sprint towards end of year?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think, compared to last year, it's far more normalized compared to where we might have thought we were or perceived to be in maybe May or June. Maybe less. I would be getting out in front. If I were an individual thought leader, I'd be getting out in front of it and having as many conversations with as many of my clients as I can, not from a pitching standpoint, but just, hey, what's going on there? You guys used to do the big, what are the things that you are doing? What are you not doing? And if you're a keynoter, as an example, they might only have you filed in the spice drawer under keynote. They might not realize that you've got, you spent the last 6 months building a video-based training and development system, or you developed an app or an assessment tool, whatever. So I think it's up to you, because you have probably changed a lot, meaning maybe your message, but certainly your business models in the last 18 months. And does anybody but you know about it? Have you put the effort into broadcast to your clients and such, and reintroduce the suite of tools and where they should think of you and how they should think of when to use you? Because if they're thinking
Well,
2022, no keynotes, don't need to talk to Bill anymore, that's bad.
Well, and what I would say on that is the responsibility for you getting that information out there so that people understand how you've changed is not on them to try and figure it out, right? It's to you to reach them. Some of that can be done through broadcast, but also, like you said, getting on calls and having one on ones, understand how they've changed and explain how you've changed, right? And I think there's going to be a lot of reintroduction that's going on. And, it may be even a theme going into 2022 in terms of how are we changing?
Yeah, and I think you don't want to be sort of tossed off, or out of sight, out of mind. It's like when you go into the garage to go find a screwdriver or something, and you're like, oh, here's a bunch of Cat 5 cables. I don't, I haven't used
Right.
Cat 5 in the house in 10 years. I guess I can throw these out. They no longer serve a purpose, right? But at
Mhm.
one point they were really important. So you don't want to be the Cat 5 cable. You want to let them know, actually, I'm whatever, I'm Wi-Fi now, or I'm a router, or I'm a mesh router system or whatever, and you're still
Well, and
relevant.
to extend that metaphor, there's a life cycle of ideas and there's also a seasonality of ideas, but there's also an obsolescence of modality. So, like you said, Wi Fi versus Cat 5, right? And so, if the modality that they're no longer interested in is keynote speaking or in executive offsites, how are you going to adapt?
Yeah, no. I think that's clearly right. And then the other thing I would be observing what they, asking folks what's working for them. What are you doing? What are the kind of things you're doing? So you're not, again, we're using keynote as sort of a placeholder here, but what are the things that are working at your company? How are they dealing with, now that we've been remote for so long, managing culture, onboarding, leading and managing remotely, having conversations around DE&I that are different conversations, having conversations around, mental health. 2 years ago, it was probably inappropriate for a leader to ask someone, "Hey, you seem a little depressed, Bill," right? Like that'd be like,
Hmm.
"Whoa, what's up with that?" Now there are ways, and I'm not an expert in this space, to say, when you sense this, and not crazy extreme things, but someone's a bit off. Someone's at like, where are those
Hmm.
boundaries now? We're redefining boundaries, which is a scary place for many of us to be. So I think there's opportunity there as well. So, and any additional thoughts? Because I think this was a good beta and a test build, but we could probably start wrapping pretty soon.
Yeah, I think if I would close with any recommendation, what I would say is look back on the audience that you're trying to reach. Make sure you understand how they've changed and how they're changing, and then be prepared to be deeply relevant to them. Figure out what they need. And you're not going to do that by just sort of sitting and staring at a wall. Go have conversations.
Yeah, well put. Well, thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you on the 6th and every 2 weeks thereafter, where it'll be two amazing thought leaders, one mediocre host, and we'll see where we go from there. So thanks so much.